And
Sorry about that. We're coming up. This is part 2 of the discussion of the paper. Okay, we have a student with a question. Who has the question? Sorry.
Jacqueline.
Okay, Jacqueline, what was about interviewing?
Yeah, just if for those people who are interviewing, other people who have lived in their town for a long time, I want to interview someone, but I'm not exactly sure what questions to be asking them or what topics to be asking those questions about.
well, for me, I just asked my parents how they perceive the area and why they decided to reside there.
Okay, thank you.
I think you can also ask people to explain what you see on the map. Like you can, so in Dana's example, that cluster of Hispanic folks living in Dripping Springs, it looks like public housing to me. I'm not sure. You can say, hey, figure out what street it is. Pretend it's 16th Street. And then you say, hey, why are there Hispanics living on 16th Street? What is it? What is it about 16th Street that explains that? So that's something I would ask in interviews too.
I also have another question. So in the southwest part of Houston, there's very small concentrations within the Hispanic concentrations of Blacks. And the major factor of that is the Hurricane Katrina. And
yeah.
Yes. And I do not really know how to include Hurricane Katrina because Houston didn't see it as their problem. They saw it as a Louisiana problem.
Yes, I think you most certainly could include Hurricane Katrina if you need Hurricane Katrina to explain the presence of African Americans in that part of Houston that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. And of course, you would need to explain why in that area. You could say that this is historically, an impoverished part of Houston, or it's been a part of Houston that's home to many minorities. And what's also really fascinating and messed up? When you go back to those redlining maps of Houston, you see that pretty much everywhere where the Hispanic folks are living in East Houston, like Pasadena, down by all those oil refineries, was that redlining both labeled those places as non-eligible for funding for home loans, right? But also labeled them as places where industrial waste could take place. So what you're getting at is Houston didn't see it as its problem. And I'm guessing that in the wealthier, more politically powerful parts of the city, there was a resistance to resettling Katrina refugees.
Yes, that was Southwest Houston because I interviewed my mother and she said that after Katrina, well, they basically moved there. African Americans decided to move there because it was a low rent area, very low rent.
Right. And of course, that you can dig into the history to explain why Southwest Houston is a low rent area. And just while we're on that note, here's an example of how I would cite in the text, an interview. My aunt explained, they didn't let us go there, right? And then you just put personal interview and the date. And on that note, just by way of reminder, I've got a link here in resources. Oh, I'm showing you the wrong screen. Let me switch screens here. Okay, so back to your folder on racial segregation analysis. You've got your APA citation format. So here's a link that will tell you how to cite in your works cited any type of reference. A lot of people do get docked points having a sloppy works cited. So make sure to properly cite. If you go back to your rubric, you'll see that something like 4 out of 50 points are whether or not the paper is properly cited, both in the paper and at the end in the works cited. And that's 8 out of 100 points. So make sure that you don't just copy and paste URLs from websites. And for a lot of you, you will have to be using websites. So here's in-text citations. That's how you cite something in text. And then the reference list, okay? All the different types of references you could find. I think a really high quality paper for this paper has about 8 to 10 references. Okay. References can include newspaper articles. I don't think Gene Gonzalez is on the talk, but I was speaking with him about his paper, and he was talking to me about, he was talking to me about this really horrible lynching that had happened in his community, and how there's still this lynching tree in the middle of town. It was Columbus, Texas. I don't know if any of you have been there or know of that place. But then we started to do some research on the lynching tree in Columbus, just doing online. And we found original newspaper coverage of the lynching. And that most definitely is something that, sorry, I'm just looking at my recording. I think it's still working, that you will use. So newspapers, things that I do, folks, if I'm looking for like race relations, I do race relations. Yakima, Washington, there was just a big article in the New York Times that really had people, racism in the valley. Okay, so you'll see, here's the New York Times article. Can you all see this? This was posted. The divide in Yakima is the divide in America. What the changing, anyway. So newspaper articles are often going to be a great resource for you. So then you have to figure out, go into your link that I've given you, how you cite a newspaper in your reference list. How you cite interviews, you can do that in your reference list. Does everybody know about Google Scholar?
Yeah.
Is anybody not familiar with Google Scholar?
I'm not.
Okay, let me just bear with me if you are familiar. I would think about the sources for this paper being both your peer review academic sources, which is what you're going to get on Google Scholar. You just type in, you can search for Google Scholar or scholar.google.com. Oh, look at this. Jennifer Devine has some cutting edge new research. Just kidding. Okay, so there's that. But what you can do here is put in, okay, so I've already been doing this, Columbus, Texas segregation. Somebody give me your town that we haven't talked about. Somebody share their town. Unmute yourself.
Round Rock.
Round Rock. So here we have just academic resources, okay? And because Round Rock is so close to the story of Austin, I would probably also search for Austin, okay? So these are just your academic resources. This looks interesting. Here's an academic resource. Lots of stuff on Austin, right? And I know that Round Rock is part of the suburbanization and tech boom, right? Yes. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so you may not have as much historical information as some of these older cities. Another good source, if there's any historical association, you can search for those. Now, folks, I'm leaving Google Scholar and I'm going back to Google, which means that google.com versus scholar.google.com, these are all resources on the internet. Google Scholar are just your peer-reviewed. I need at least a couple of scholarly resources that are peer-reviewed, but then I think for most of you, you're going to be getting a lot of information online. And, you know, oftentimes Wikipedia is a good place to start. Rock, Texas. Remember that you don't ever, oh, and then of like these city government pages, search for historical associations And sometimes people, you can even get on the phone and call the library and talk to a librarian about where you can get information. Now, Round Rock is not hugely old. Sometimes you get really great demographic information. Oh, the Palm House Museum. Okay, there is a museum. If we weren't in the middle of COVID-19, I would tell you to go to that museum, right? If you were doing racial segregation in San Marcos, which is actually a really interesting story too, you could go to the Calaboose African American Museum here in town, which was the previous penitentiary for quote unquote colored people, as they were called during the time. So San Marcos itself has a really fascinating history of racial segregation. The Dunbar neighborhood was the African and American neighborhood. And sometimes you've got to go to these little old museums or go to the libraries to get that info. Now, for those of you who are doing Round Rock, let me just draw your attention to one more resource. Because, okay, or who was doing Southwest Houston?
Carla and myself, but
Okay.
I was.
Okay, yeah, so sometimes, like, let's say you had this theory that the Asian population booms with the creation of the medical facilities, right? Or if you were doing Round Rock and you need to account for an Asian population and you suspect that Asian population is correlated to the headquartering of international corporations in tech, then you might even go back to some census data. And here's the census, and it's only by county. What county is Austin in, Travis?
Travis.
Yeah, so you can actually play around here, and let's say if you could go and you could look and say in 1960, there were only a handful of Asian communities or people living in Travis County, but by the year 1990 or 2000, there's been a huge spike. You can draw on that census data, which you'll cite, and say, here, my hypothesis that this population growth of Asian folks is related to the headquartering of tech. That's borne out in this census data that illustrates, an increase of 44% in 10 years or whatever the case. Okay. All right, what other questions do you all have?
I was just going to add a little tidbit on the Google Scholar, I guess. I noticed when I was doing some research that there are some articles that require subscription, and if you run into one of those, it won't let you read most of it. It'll just give you like the abstract. And if you go to the Texas State Library database page, every time I've found the database and the subscriptions paid for. It's just easier to search with Scholar than to flip through databases.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you for reminding us, Mitchell. You can find these articles on the databases in Alkek. There's also a way setting up your server like I've done through proxy, like a proxy server. Are y'all familiar with this?
No.
And you could get online and ask the Alkek librarians who are like online all the time right now to how you would do that. But what I think I can do, and what you all should be able to do if you set up a proxy access, it's as if you were on campus, and any holding that we have at Texas State that's electronic, I can get here, which is really cool. I get so lazy that I hardly ever use the library search engines because these are just so much more straightforward. And for your purposes, this is plenty. Yeah, so there's that. I don't know exactly how I have it set up. I don't know, for example, Mitchell, if you were to put in Jim Crow Baltimore, if this PDF link would pop up. But yeah, it certainly makes it handy, right?
Yeah, I just kind of would leave the article up and then open a new tab with the Texas State Library, find the database, and then
find it
type
that
in
way.
there, and it would give it to me whole.
I'm also remembering that at some point we had, Search strategies. This, okay, yes, it's still here. Okay, so let me go back so you all see where that was. It was under census data. So if you go back to, remember that we're here, political geography, census data, and then search strategies. I have this web page here. Actually, the librarians set this up for us, and there's some more links to sources. So finding books. This is going to take you down the road of familiarizing yourself with the library search engines. I'm saying, you know, be quick and dirty about it and use Google Scholar. But there's another resource here for you to read. Okay.
Dr. Devine.
Yes.
I was wondering, as far as like illustrations and examples, can we use those into our paper?
I would encourage you. I would encourage you to draw on other illustrations and other maps. And that does not count to your 8 to 10 page limit.
For sure.
You have half a page of images, then you have 10.5 page total limit for your paper. So yes, you have to, you know, if you need a map to make your point apart from the one that I'm requiring, please. If you have images of, you know, the Calaboose African American Native or African American Museum in San Marcos, the old location of the African American jail, then put that picture in there. Most definitely, that's going to be evidence. Bring the landscape to life, please. And I was trying to get to Google Maps, or, you know, I can't, for some reason I'm blanking because I have an audience. But when you can do your Google views, use Google Maps to look at the town. That's often a great location for some images. What other questions do you all have?
I actually have a question for do we have to stick with supporting the racial segregation analysis through just stuff we strictly talked about in class, like the redlining or the housing administration, or can we use our, like based on our research, can we support racial segregation through our research, or does it have to be just the topics related to class, if that makes sense?
This is your chance to build on what we've done and go beyond what we've done in class.
Gotcha.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I did manage to find what I was looking for here. What I'm talking about here is just Google Maps. Here's Dripping Springs. Oh, there's the Deep Eddy Vodka Tasting Room.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got satellite coverage. And, you know, this is an example, Adam, of how you might want to incorporate another map. This, you know, I want to go back, if I don't want to take you all through the loop-de-loop here, but here's Dripping Springs. I could go back to where I saw that concentration of Hispanic people and then actually look on the map to see what's there. Right? So sometimes that's really useful. Other questions?
I have a question. As far as citing like census data goes, how would we go about that?
Well, the most important thing is that you cite it, and I actually don't know. That's a good question. So I would go back to that website, and let me go ahead and, whoopsie, share my screen. Okay. All right, so I would go back here. This is under resources, prompts and rubrics, racial segregation analysis, and then APA citation format. You should be able to search this here, or be a government data. Cite your source automatically on APA website. So you get it from there. I don't know how this will work here. Okay, that's like a citation builder. Probably a little bit more complex than what we need. But here, I would just look, I'm back to that link. And reference list, other print sources, you would be able to find it in here. I think that probably the census would be an electronic source. And they're giving you some examples here. And if you have a question, you can always just email me and I can help you. But this, of course, would require that you not wait to the last minute. So here they give examples like an online periodical with no DOI, a newspaper, electronic, online dictionary, data sets, government, it's in here. Qualitative data and online interviews. Yep. You'll find it in here somewhere. Or you could just Google it. How to cite census data APA. There it is. Oh, hold on. New share. Sorry, folks. I just Googled it, and that's what I found. That's fine. I'm not going to be nitpicky about the citation format. Let's say you have something slightly different than this. But what's not, I don't care. But what I do care is that you can't just copy and paste the URL into the works cited. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great.
If we're citing something from a website, like to use in our paper as a quote, is it okay to put the website URL with that quote?
Yeah.
And not cited? Would that be okay?
Yeah, and what I think is, I mean, I've given you that link to all the millions of ways that you can cite, but what we're realizing is that you can quickly sort of just Google or search in your engine how to cite a website or something like that, and it'll tell you how to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's just really important to remember to cite in text, like when you're writing your paper in the body of the paper itself. You need to give your citations for any time you've borrowed an idea or a direct quote. That's when you need to cite, okay? And folks, you've got a little bit of time for those of you who are really wanting to get the A and are willing to put the work into it. What I would consider that you do is spend the next couple of days after writing section 1 and section 2, spend the next couple of days working with your outline of your 3 dynamics, and then set up an appointment with me, even for just 15 minutes, and we can focus in on your 3 dynamics and make sure that you've got a good structure for your paper. That's, I think, a smart strategy. So you can email me. You can even email me your 3 dynamics. And if I say, good, go for it, that sounds fantastic, move on forward. If I say, I think this needs work, we should talk, then we can schedule an appointment then too. We've got about 10 minutes left, folks, so I'm just gonna leave it open for people who have questions.
Were the discussion questions, was that a grade? I'm sorry.
The discussion questions for Granito?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Nope, that is not for a grade. Just for exam prep.
Oh, I actually.
We do like if we're like I'm doing Austin, and if we wanted to break up our like 3 different things into really like eras and talk about the factors that happened in those eras, like, you know, like sort of like a pre-World War II era, like up to the late 60s and then like 1970s and beyond with like the explosion of tech and stuff in Austin. Would that be an acceptable way to do it?
I would not recommend structuring it in terms of, I'm going to look at racial segregation in these 3 eras. I would choose the most important moment from each of those 3 eras. And then in my 2 pages, talk about how that most important moment relates to everything else. So just as you said, you're talking about the 3rd moment of the 1970s to the present and talking about tech coming to town, I would put the headquartering of major tech and communication companies in the 1980s as the dynamic. And then when you get to that number 3 dynamic, you talk about how gentrification today is related to that historical moment. Does
Gotcha.
that make sense?
Yes.
I have a question about posting on the forums. Do
Okay.
we just post once a week, or is it after every single lecture we should be posting?
I would love for you to post after every lecture, but it's just voluntary. And you certainly, it's not required, but it's a way for you to boost your participation grade in the class.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good question.
Is there is there like another lecture for today, or is today just
It's just that, yeah,
just
there's
this?
no assigned reading for today. It's kind of a
Oh.
stop and breathe and build some time into the course to talk about the paper, because it's 30% of your grade. And I've realized in the past that when we would meet in person, if I didn't take a whole lecture just to talk about the paper, we didn't have enough time. So you're off the hook with assigned readings for today. But on that note, Wednesday's reading is another sort of challenging theoretical text. I have just assigned a couple of pages. So be sure to pay attention to the pages that are assigned for Wednesday. And I always, always, always ask on the final exam the question, according to Bill Cronin, what is the trouble with wilderness? So I want you to be able to summarize what he argues the trouble with the concept of wilderness is. So that's where we're headed on Wednesday. It's one of the most famous texts in environmental history, and really important for people like myself who argue that we can't think about nature and society being separate. Okay. Any other questions? You know, folks, all of you who are here, you know, Sawyer, Evan, June, Bailey, all of you, I see that, you know, you're some of the most, Carla, Mitchell, Ross, Sydney just joined on, Adam, you're all doing a great job in the course. And I would encourage you to, you know, jumpstart here at this moment and really, you know, write down a draft thesis statement that has your 3 historical factors and send it to me. That we still have time at this point. You'll be surprised what we can accomplish in 10 or 15 minutes talking about your paper. Okay. Oh, the other thing that I'll do, folks, and I need one of you to remind me if I forget, I'm going to post a couple examples of what some A-level papers in the past have looked like, so that you have an example. Would that be helpful?
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Anybody else have any other questions?
Could I also include in my paper for Belair after World War II? Because Belair used to just be like a huge farmland, I believe. And then after World War II, that's when it actually became like for housing and such. And I was using Wikipedia for Belair, and they had mentioned Levittown, or like, I think they mentioned Levitt.
Yeah.
So I could include that as well.
Yeah, that's great evidence. That suggests to me that part of the whiteness of Bel Air is explained by the fact that it was a suburban development and that communities of color were denied mortgages to buy into that development. And I would probably even search on Google like Bel Air, Houston racial covenant and see if if you could get some evidence of explicit covenants or deeds that prohibited the sale of properties to people of color.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, does anybody else have any last minute questions? I like to leave a little bit of awkward silence to allow people to ask questions, but now it's getting a bit awkward.
Sorry, I think I've got it all covered. I'll probably email you in the next day or so and see about either a meeting and or some words of advice.
Okay, that sounds good. And if there's anything that I should be keeping in mind in terms of helping you all through this difficult time, or if you have any suggestions for me, I'm really open to them. I think, one option we might want to consider is hosting a couple of lectures live, like on Wednesday. We could do the Cronin lecture live.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if people think that that would be helpful. I've been concerned about the video not working. What do you think? Should we try it on Wednesday?
I think we should, because I prefer live, because I'm able to actually ask the questions like right then and there.
Yeah, I second that.
And does live mean we can, like if we can't get to it right at the time that it's recorded, that we can go back?
Yeah.
And-
So
okay.
yeah, I think it would just be like we're doing now. Right now I'm recording this conversation. And we could give it a go on Wednesday and see if the quality of the recording is still okay, even with all this traffic.
Yeah, I've seen it work surprisingly well. I mean, as close as we can to being in class.
Great. Okay. So let's try that on Wednesday, okay? I'll send an email out to your colleagues, and I'll try to remember. I've got a bit going on today, but just make sure that I do post the example of the paper that I've mentioned, and I'll be sure to do that as well.
All right. See you Wednesday.
Okay, we'll see you Wednesday. Sydney, let's meet back at 2, okay? I'm going to run to the bathroom. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I hope that you're well. Take care of each other, yourselves, and be patient. We're going to make it through.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.